But Laurence also worked for 5 years as a senior environmental advisor to the French Prime Minister Lionel Jospin. She chaired the French national debate on the energy transition, and she founded and directed the renowned Institute of Sustainable Development and International Relations, also known by its acronym ERIN. We're going to talk for about 35 minutes, and then there'll be time for about 10 minutes of questions from the floor. So if there's anything you'd like to ask, make some notes while we're speaking. Laurence, I'd like to begin by asking you about the Paris Agreement, which was one of the greatest diplomatic achievements of this decade so far. I think there's no question that it marked a turning point for the international climate talks, but do you think it also marked a turning point for international climate finance?
My take is yes. I remember, I think, reading the final draft we proposed for adoption. And very early on, we put this finance in the Article 2 of the agreement, like it is really to reorient finance to a low-carbon economy, the whole finance, not a niche finance, the whole finance. This message was a very big surprise for a public which were the government, of course, but of course climate and environment representative and diplomats. And of course, this was not haphazard. It has been coming from a huge and long and detailed discussion with the financial community saying we need a signal from the government, because if not, the entire community would not move. So first, this one, and I see that now in many circles, private investors, public investors as well, refer to that Article 2 saying we have to consider that this is a trend, this is a future. Even more, just after Paris Agreement, in the first months of the 2016, a number of groups decided that whatever the government will deliver, they will implement the Paris Agreement goals. And is that the strongest message I can tell that came out of Paris? Is that the idea that businesses, investors, cities, regions, together with government, but in their own, because of their own stake, we'd say we will implement, we will follow the same goals, we share the objective, we'll do it anyway. And we are there. We, after, of course, the Trump decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and this incredible reaction so from many sectors in the American society, again, investors, buyers, governors, and investors saying, we will do it anyway. So this repetition, for me, it's an incredible signal that, and a revolution in global governance terms, that when a collective action objective is set, actors independently from their government decided that's the route for them. So that, in my view, now of course after that it opened up a conversation we could not have before Paris, which was this idea of the climate risk disclosure and all this 2050 long-term vision for investors. This was, we tried to unlock this before Paris, of course, together with Mark Carney, but it was too soon. But Paris opened up the discussion, and we could have it afterwards. And it opened up in, I see financial institutions like EIB, for example, in Europe, or even Bank of America in the US, just shifting the very conservative views they had before to something that we have to deliver this. That said, it's just the beginning. But I will probably not take too long. If not, I can continue on Paris Agreement.
Well, you can bring in some other issues. I mean, I think one of the key problems that people often tell me no one is talking about are the sums of money which will be needed to transform our economy and to meet the 2050 objectives. I mean, it'll take trillions of euros, trillions of dollars investment above business as usual trajectories. I mean, the European Commission says that on our continent alone, which is one of the world's richest continents, it'll take between 180 and 230 billion every year in additional clean energy investments. But it's not yet clear to many people on how exactly those huge sums will be mobilised. One UNFCCC official I spoke to at the Marrakesh COP23 summit told me the real question is, how are you going to change the whole financial structure on this planet to get these big sums moving? I was wondering what for you are the 3 key things that are needed to transform today's climate investment picture?
One, of course, we have to recognize that we are not there. Again, preparing Paris, we were speaking about millions. Whoever could bring these 600 millions as sort of clean investment. So we were just very low, and still it was seeming to be a big effort for some investors to rally and to say that's a commitment we bring to Paris. And then, of course, what we need is just incommensurate. That's not the same order of magnitude. And even when you look at European investment, it was still very low in terms of green investment. Maybe the Chinese perspective, domestic perspective, is a little bit better, but still, so we are far. So I think we need 3 big elements in my view. One is, I think, coming from what the financial sector respond to, which is how this sector will measure risk, which was, of course, the object of the task force that Mark Carney launched on having the perception by the financial community of the risk implied by necessarily evolving policies on the climate side and against fossil fuel, and on the other side, of course, the risk of the climate impacts themselves. So that's this disclosure, and with the interest that this task force recommended additionally, and I remember the strong discussion in Davos last year at the beginning, saying we don't have to only measure our carbon footprint, but we have to understand and explain to the community of the ones who are rating us and who are assessing our risk, what our plan to decarbonize our portfolio. This is a massive innovation. Because again, in the discussion, and like many of you have been associated talking to the different members of this task force, the idea of just the carbon footprint cannot deliver the signal we are looking for. So that is a very important key, and I think the target, and from the philanthropy point of view now, I think what we have to get is that these signals are made mandatory, because the voluntary démarche will not deliver it at scale. I think the second issue is about how the public funding comes in and really have a policy at domestic and international level to de-risk this finance, this private finance, to really encourage, to in a way reassess the risk which is affected to this green investment. We know that the risk assessment is wrong. When you look at the price, for example, on what renewable energy from solar is compared to even coal, you know that it's not a fair assessment of the risk, including, and of course not including even the long term, even on the short term, but there is a lot of political economy there. Structures of companies, state-owned companies, politics of infrastructure, everything just plays against that. So the public funding has to be really reoriented in a way that they de-risk, meaning they really finally not only solve the tragedy of horizons, bringing the long term to the short term, but even just simply make the investor recognize that there are very good business opportunities there. And the final thing is, of course, the de-risking will not make it alone. You have to have the public policies in place, which is very trivial, so I will not be long, but we need market creation. Very, very good examples these days. France, UK, India in a more probably informal way, probably China these next days announces a date by which they would not want to see any new combustion engine sold in the country. And many cities are taking the same step. This is an absolutely powerful market signal. So it's not only about right policies, but it is as well as market signals. And I think we need a lot of these signals from the public side, public procurement, signals on what will be regulated in the future. All this is bringing very strong standards on the fossil fuel-based plants. All this will bring this signal to the market and make, in a way, understandable the risks that these investors are facing.
That's a very interesting response. It's essentially disclosure, procurement, and public support. What I would say is that there is an increasingly strong argument from some thinkers like Naomi Klein, George Monbiot, who write in The Guardian, that fighting climate change is incompatible with neoliberal economics. I mean, Naomi Klein argues that to begin to return to climate stability, we will need a World War II scale mobilization and coordination of global resources, capacities, which the market alone by definition can't provide, and you alluded to that, but which tax cuts and deregulation can entirely sabotage. Do you think that fighting climate change requires a break with neoliberalism? And if so, what would you put in its place?
Well, of course, big question, and certainly a quite bold response, particularly on what do you put in the place, which is of course more difficult than to say what we can't achieve. But neoliberalism in its pure form, which in a way you never know what is liberalism these days, because it's a mix of monopolies plus market-oriented economies, etc. It's quite complex. But nevertheless, it's not only climate change. You don't solve major the growth of inequality, problems of really collective failures, many market failures and many collective failures. Sometimes I read this paper, but I feel that we can't just dream that we go back to a very strong state with a lot of tax collection capacity, as you mentioned. We are in a global economy, we will not just reverse that, or I don't know if we would be a very good trend to reverse that without understanding the consequences, the global consequences, in particular for the people who are working with this global market, and of course the risk of this nationalism and the protectionism that can, in a way, regulating market doesn't mean necessarily to close them, so there is a lot of nuance to bring to this. But I think that we need to think in a more distributed leadership manner, where the government only will not bring the solution. And this collective action problem, which again, that's the critique we can make to neoliberalism, that apparently individual decision. In reality, there are big, of course, uneven field, and even it's not the same playing field for all. So it's not so much individual, but really different powers that finally organize this market or intervene in this market. So if we think differently, and really that's what inspired me to try to craft the Paris consensus beyond the text itself, which was how we align objective with many tools, trying to bring in this long-term horizon, this collective action problem in the responsibility of each and every actor, and to try to push for their understanding, their coordination, their dialogue, so that they share at least global goals, global strategies, and they in a way look at each other and they monitor each other. It's not a very precise response I can give you, because of course it probably represents strong and deep innovation in the governance of our societies, how you get citizens having a role to monitor, for example, voluntary commitments, or to check if really companies are disinvesting, for example, from this fossil fuel economy. So we need to reinvent the governance system to produce that, but I don't believe that will be a return back to Keynesian economics in the classic term, because we are in a different phase, and digitalization increased even more the difficulties of going back there. So in my view, and that's why I joined philanthropy finally, in going back to NGOs, is that I think the citizen and the local governments have a major role to play to get the system in place, that everyone does a job and to challenge them. And that's why I'm very excited about ECF, because I feel that when you look at all the partners, even if it was not the topic of the discussion, from engaging with government, having these dialogues, engaging with private sector, engaging with, so discussing and trying to find what could be a common goal. And at the same time, informing the citizens, supporting NGO activities, even campaigns to check and to be the sort of a check and balance we need in the society. And then even go to litigation when finally citizens recognize, or companies, that's not, the game is not fair, and people are not respecting the rule of law or even the fairness of the system. I think if we use all these tools to push everyone in the same direction, that's what I think of distributed leadership from, in a way, from behind. I think that the civil society has an enormous role to play to do that. And I see you see the American Pledge, for example, I was referring to that just earlier, just fantastic tool from campaigning in the streets of Washington to the immense campaign of litigation that many NGOs and citizens will conduct in the US against pruit deregulation and business involvement. That's a fantastic way of reform the system.
I have to ask, just because I've been writing about this, have you heard anything about any potential changes, official changes to the US pledge, which may be announced in the week ahead?
Good changes? Question mark. Let's see what they announce. I don't know how they will manage. I would not be happy to be in their shoes, to look good and doing less. Communication challenge, certainly. But yes, it happens that probably by Monday or over the weekend they will announce something. And let's see. I'm curious. I'm not more informed than you. I'm curious.
As I will. Well, you talked in your last answer about checks and balances.
But we will see Monday the announcement of the American Pledge, which is a civil society response to the government announcement. So that will be interesting.
Well, civil society is important, and you talked about monitoring company investments. I'd just like to move the conversation on a bit to some more finance-specific issues, particularly the G20 task force on climate-related financial disclosures, and this brought out recommendations for a voluntary framework over the summer. I was wondering how effective you think it will be, given that it's not obligatory, it's not mandatory, and what early signs there are of the scale of compliance that we can expect.
For the moment, we are not serious about this implementation of this recommendation. Some countries have just showed that they will do that legally. I'm very proud that France decided that in the Energy Transition Law in this Article 173. So others should do that now. And I hope that will be a strong campaign in Europe that member states decided that they will follow that, and the EU Commission will be a driver for this. Now, I think we have to turn to the business who said we will do it. So just now, guys, ladies, do it. And I think at the summit of December 12 in Paris, I hope that many NGOs, investors, organizations, whoever said, when will you announce that? And what is your target? By when? So I think that's a moment, just a moment of the truth. This recommendation finally, it was a shock, huh? The recommendation of the TCFD, again, thinking about the discussion in the corridor in Davos last year, it was a shock. Not so much the carbon footprint, everyone was prepared. But the thing that you have to announce how you plan to decarbonize, this was a shock, because nobody was really prepared. And that's a signal that it was like, it's okay to say that we are good or bad at this really footprint, how we incorporate our partners or not, the value chain. But when the moment of the truth is where you will be in 2050 consistent with Paris, which is the philosophy of this disclosure on the long term, that is a real question. It's no surprise that it's very new, because for the moment all the climate action in the business sector, the investment sector, beyond the front runner, has been incremental. We'll do more, we'll do what we can, but we don't envisage the deep transformation we need. So I think that is the importance of the TCFD recommendation. Now, of course, we have a beautiful set of action we can push for to just make this mindset begin to be entering in the boards, in the executive committees, in everywhere in the business sphere. And I think it's coming. But again, that's reason that this year of 2018 is so important, because I feel that in the California summit in September, I hope I will see a massive number of investors, business, just delivering on this recommendation and really making strong commitment with really clear timetables. So,
isn't the problem, though, that the companies which are most exposed to fossil fuel investments will be the least likely to be transparent about it? I mean, you mentioned mandatory signals earlier, and just now you said for the moment we're not being serious about implementation. Would you like to see financial climate disclosure obligation turned into obligations as opposed to a voluntary framework, and if so, by who?
The mandatory cannot come from anywhere else from the government, so the government has to decide that they put that in their own legislature. And I don't see nothing preventing them. It would be difficult. Some countries are really facing a huge difficulties. You imagine Saudi Arabia, Iran, or others. But that's a beginning. And the ones who can and could then incentivize their own business to look forward, to be more innovative, could go on. And I see that on the carbon disclosure, the discussion with some oil companies are not that bad. They are beginning to see, yes, we have to diversify. We have to have a long-term plan. A Shell still is work in progress, if I can say so, has a decarbonizing plan for 2050, zero carbon. So, again, a process, but we have to understand that will be uneven because, of course, the dependence on fossil fuel for many economies is different. So you can't expect India to decide carbon disclosure and decarbonization overnight. That's not possible.
Well, in Europe there have also been attempts to deal with these issues, and although it's early days, I was wondering if you had any opinions about the European Commission's high-level expert group on sustainable finance, on the sort of impact you think it could have, and how much support you think it will get from member states.
I think one, it was very, very good to launch that group, and very high-quality group, very good interim report, ambitious. Of course, now they have to land that report in concrete and feasible recommendation. I have no view on what will be the reaction, but it was very good to see that even if we knew we could not get mandatory, to make mandatory the TCFD recommendation in the G20 in Hamburg, still this process could go on and continue in Europe. And so I think that was a very important move from the Commission to do that. And EU needs to put in place, hopefully by 2018, it should not be delayed, of course, to have a sound, sustainable finance strategy. In the legacy of, even if you may not want to reopen difficult compromise on the 2040 targets or whatever, but I think what they can do is to build the blocks of what more ambition for the next phase. And this is one block, a major block. Everybody recognizes that the key driver of all this climate action is finance. It's a key driver. And for many of these reasons we just mentioned, the limited role of public funding, so many meaning that moving this finance is absolutely key. So I think that will be sort of a good legacy for Juncker to really have this sustainable finance strategy, supported hopefully by what this recommendation of the high-level group could produce.
Well, one of the things it recommends is a sustainability test for relevant EU financial legislation. That was in the early preliminary recommendations, I should say. I remember it back in the days of Barroso talking to a very senior person in his administration, who I should probably not name, who was saying they personally favoured and would try to persuade Barroso of the need for a carbon audit or test on all EU policy decisions, that all EU policy should have to say how much CO2 is going to be created by following it through. And do you think that would be a good idea? I mean, when at the moment, even for energy union, there's no attempt to audit the emissions that will be created from gas transmission pipelines, etc.
That's a good idea. That would be excellent to have a sort of a process where we assess how much climate-friendly are the policy decisions, and that we have a broad assessment of all, including agriculture, land use, mobility, etc. Well, all issues have an impact, of course. And so I think it's a very, very good idea for philanthropy, by the way, to do it.
Okay, well, again, moving on slightly, I just wanted to talk about the European Central Bank and its quantitative easing program, which I think is investing 2 trillion euros. Certainly many billions of those euros are in the oil, gas and auto sectors. From the ISIN numbers, the ISIN records we've seen, in the last time around, it included 11 bond purchases from Shell, 16 from Eni, 7 from Total, 6 from Repsol, 6 from OMV. In Italy, gas utilities accounted for 68% of security transactions bought with QE money, and in Spain the figure was 53%. I was reading a report from the Grantham Research Institute at the LSE, which found that 62% of the ECB's corporate bond purchases were in industrial sectors responsible for 59% of the Eurozone's greenhouse gas emissions. We don't know exactly because the ECB refuses to say where it's invested the money because it would create a market distortion. But of course, not disclosing that information also creates a market distortion. And I was just wondering if you thought it creates a policy dissonance as well. And I was wondering if you thought the task force's disclosure principles should be applied to the ECB too. How would you characterise this situation?
Well, the logic, of course, is yes. And I hope that the Juncker 2 plan will be different. I would be weird that I haven't read this speech yesterday. At least he mentioned climate, I think. But it would be weird to just not to look at the distances about investment as well. So I think that would be an excellent discipline that there is at least, even if, well, with the regulation and the confidentiality needed, that this carbon footprint would be explained and publicized. There is no reason that ECB would escape that.
I mean, the EIB, the EBRD, the EU's MFF ones, these are all bound by EU climate policy, and the ECB is not. I mean, how do you see that state of affairs?
Well, I haven't thought through. It's a good point. Of course, I'm monitoring and discussing with many colleagues in this financial institution, and I see the positive evolution there. I think there is a massive evolution of the EIB. EBRD was, anyway, very active on the ground on all that, and so on this financial institution, and even on I hope that it will reflect that was a budget of the next budget of EU and the sort of the aid policy of EU. All policies should be screened so that what we mentioned before. Quantitative easing is an interesting question, and anyway, publicity should be. We should allow to check that, but that's their responsibility to do it.
Okay. Well, we're going to open it up. I think we can open up now for questions from the floor. If you have a question, please put your hand up. And before you speak, if you're offered the microphone by one of our assistants, please say your name and organisation. Yeah.
Luke Bogoleski from Polish organization called Development is Open and Node. I used to work for Citibank, which work on EIB, and so I have some insight. But my question is, as we are coming towards presenting national decarbonization pathways, and we have come to talk to companies about their plan and taking on the risk. Following a little bit on Ortel's question, do you think we should apply the same logic to financial institutions and ask them to present a decarbonization pathway for their portfolio, not for their institution themselves, but the things they invest in? taking on broadly banks, insurance, pension funds, ECB, and others. Because unless we have all the players going the same pathway, we'll not get to zero in 2050. Because you just need a few players who are not complying, and these are the ones that we are not having an overview with.
Just music to my ears. I am obsessed with this long-term perspective, and I made sure when I drafted with my colleagues the draft for the Paris Agreement, I made sure that this decarbonization pathway, the long-term pathway we're in, even with a different status than the committed contribution, of course, and there was, of course, a careful balance between the two. And I launched in Marrakesh in 2016, last year, the platform to where I would like, and it's happening. Government, business, local governments, where they're different size, presenting this decarbonization pathway. I think we need to know what kind of scenario we made to be consistent with Paris by 2050. And if not, if we don't do that, if we don't share that, every time somebody would say somebody else would do the job. And it's very interesting to see that in many scenarios that are presented by big international institutions and many commissions, most of the time when it's very difficult to understand how a sector can decarbonize, in particular, of course, in the industrial sector or the energy sector, we see now more and more how it can be done. You see that the carbon capture and sequestration just comes to close the model. We don't know how we'll do that, so somebody will take care, or we could store the carbon somewhere. And that's why I think this exercise, this collective, meaning everyone doing the job, to understand what could be its business, and cities look like, or its economy look like, by 2050, consistent with Paris meaning going to net zero emission by the second half of the century. If you don't do that exercise, you will never get there. A good plan certainly is not a recipe for success, but if you don't have a plan, it's sure you will never deliver that. So I'm a totally big fan. That's why I was so happy to see in the TCFD this recommendation of actual, in static terms, carbon footprint is important, but it's not make the job. We need to know, you need to learn, you need to explain what to do. And again, many companies are now looking at themselves, how we do that. And for the moment, you have a very sort of uncertain response. We'll never be there, we can't do that, it's too much a transformation, whatever arguments. But I think the mechanics are taking in that now you can't ignore that the 2050 may seem very far, is no more far, and you have to understand very quickly how you get there. So I'm just militant of the 2050 pathways, and really this platform is there, and it's now beginning really to work well.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, lady at the back there in the blue top.
I'm Miriam van der Stichelen and part of the high-level committee. One of the issues, and I think it comes from what you're saying, the whole competitiveness which is in the market makes it very difficult to find out what are the others going to do. If I do it, it will be costly in the short term. In the long term, it might be profitable. So I was just wondering, where do you think it's also a need for disincentives? Do we need to have it like by 2018, 2020, say, well, you know, the plans very, very clearly show it doesn't work, but what would be kind of major disincentives? And secondly, in the committee, we are very much struggling, as we were saying, with the social aspect. But I also see very much that you need to engage to make sure that the social aspect is kind of also reinforcing the willingness to go for the transition also by the population. So I was just wondering where you see arguments coming in to make sure that human rights, income, resilience by people also for dealing with climate disasters is coming in.
Yes, I think it's a good thing that we are not now relying only on the price mechanism, which was very much the debate from Kyoto back to 1997, that the market will solve the problem if we put a price on carbon. Nevertheless, so now unfortunately, we realize that it's more complex, we need many more measures, many more policy tools, many more signals, but we need to have it anyway. And so, again, that's slow. We have massive problem with the EU ETS these days. It's difficult to make a market function with this uncertainty on the growth rate. That's why the carbon tax is, again, taking a little more credit, because it's a way more adapted probably with what how the economy function, and in a way simpler probably to manage. So we need both of them. And we can't do, of course we describe many tools. We can have public procurement, de-risking, public agencies helping funding clean investment. But if you don't have the pricing not right, again, you see that now the renewable sector doesn't need any subsidies in many countries. But still, the problem of the the level playing field is really a problem. Then, going around to your question, one, I think there is really a cognitive dissonance, not so much in Europe, but in US it's very clear. You have extreme events striking these really two big regions in US. And still climate seems to be, it's an elite question, where people are just, it's not the elite people who are losing their homes, or who are losing sometimes their lives. And so I think that's a problem we have, this climate community, or the one who really want to be interested, how we communicate to citizens that it's not an elite issue, it's an issue for everyone. And it's not because there is a transition, and climate will not be responsible of more poverty or more losing more jobs. Not to tell a sort of ideal sort of story where climate action, green policies, a green economy will provide all the jobs we need. That's not true either, because that's much more complex than that. But the idea that climate is for elites and the impact of any climate policy will be on the poor is very, very, very difficult to really change. Even if we're looking at the polls in Europe, as the polls, the citizens in Europe still think, even if there is this elite versus citizen view, that climate change comes immediately after terrorism as a major risk. So we are in between. We have to be able to get out our climate bubble and to talk to people, to relate climate with their air quality. I see the progress. We are very working with association in Poland on air quality, because that's the way probably citizens can grab this issue and understand that they could do differently. I saw that in the Financial Times today, that by the way the Polish government would like to make a sort of announcement on electrification of mobility. That's just great. Well, it depends on the type of electricity behind. But still, so I think we have to connect with the people, and that was not, of course, what we were very good at, I can tell.
Okay, I'd actually like to just ask a question there, because I thought there was an interesting point how you steer investment towards long-term returns in socially desirable long-term returns in a competitive environment where short-term paybacks are often a guiding principle. What I wanted to ask about really was energy efficiency, which was being talked about a year or two ago as the first fuel, the one that's not used, and is no longer being talked about, and in which investment not only is not increasing, but seems to be going into reverse, according to people in the industry I talk to. What do you think are the particular problems there, and how can they be tackled?
The first one is the price of energy, why finally in industry in particular, energy efficiency seems to slow down, which I should check. I'm not totally aware of this sort of slowdown in investment, but it's related to the price of oil and the price of gas. First, so that comes back to the carbon tax. So that's one. The second is maybe we are, in terms of efficiency, in front of very big nuts to crack, and that we cannot go maybe further, or if we don't have totally different financial model, or if we have disruptive technologies. We see that when you take the very interesting case of the cars, the new regulation on standards on cars, if we push them again more at European level, means that we have to change the technology to be consistent with. So on buildings it's more confused, complex, such a huge past dependency of what we have as a stock, and a complex model of financing this. So it's a big question mark. Many countries are trying with some success. If I look at Sweden or Germany, I think France is really trying to have a huge program of refitting of buildings. But still, that we see that the public role is central because it doesn't come through the market easily. So there are very different questions about efficiency, and sometimes we say it's the first fuel, it's the easiest, the more cost-effective. I think the assessment it was a more cost-effective maybe was wrong, meaning because of all this environment, legal aspects, transaction costs, etc. So I think we have underestimated the efficiency gain possible. Of course, the easy one have been done on appliance, on standards, etc. But on industry, I would check back. It's interesting.
Okay. We only have time for one more round of questions. Can I take 2 or 3 questions? Lady over here first.
Thank you for this. My name is Cindy Coltman, and I'm from Amsterdam, and I work for an NGO called Both Ends. And I also am active in the fossil-free movement. So, I would like to really hear what your perspective is. The thing that worries me the most is that the year 2050 is still being used in end of the century. And I don't think we have that long if you see all the signs of what's already going on with 1 degree warming, the permafrost, the hurricane, everything. So my question is this: where do you fall on that scale? What do you think is going to be the wake-up call that we're going to bring this back down to talking about 2030, 2035? And then, how do you see the financial practices then changing? Because what we see certainly in the Netherlands still is pension funds and others remaining in coal, oil, gas, despite so the inaction that we're seeing. So my biggest question is just timeline. Do you really think we've got to 2050?
Okay, and can we take 2 more questions? Gentleman here with the yellow tie.
Lars Jensen from the Danish NGO Sustainable Energy. I just wanted, the question here was the role of the financial sector, and just, we began with all these numbers, how much investment is needed, and one of the numbers that are in the Paris Agreement is 100 billion for the southern development. And I once saw that the oil industry in itself is investing 200 billion in emerging markets a year. And that argument also, if you take, say, a Nissan Leaf is an investment in the low carbon future, and Nissan Qashqai isn't, they're built on the same production line. So if you just increase the number of Nissan Leafs being produced, and my question there is, the existing financial flows in existing businesses, sort of the one in the oil business, how much of that can be switched? And that's, for all the bad things about financial services, one of the things financial services are very good at is shifting giant amounts of money in no time, which is exactly what we need with climate change. And I want to, coming from Denmark, and we have Dong Energy, which was a coal utility 10 years ago and is a world leader in offshore wind today. It was near bankrupt 5 years ago, and hadn't it been for Goldman Sachs, it would have gone bankrupt. And Goldman Sachs doubled their money on that investment. They went into that because they realized there's money to be made. And I know that's heresy for people who don't like the neoliberalism, but actually Goldman Sachs helped save that and became a government issue, and the Socialist Party lifted on and whatnot. But the question is this big shift in financial services and within existing companies?
Okay, and last question from Catherine.
Great, thank you. Laurence, I was just intrigued by, you talked about the need for deep innovation in the governance of our countries, and even of a need to reinvent governance systems to address this challenge of climate change. And I would love to understand more what you mean by that.
Laurence.
So on the, I understand your concern. So my response is not, oh, let's see what we can do in 2050. No, absolutely not. It's if what do we need to be in 2050, and then how we backcast and today, and what we have to do today to have a chance of being there in 2050. So 2050 is not a let's see what we can do. It's how we get there. What is a pathway? So the problem is a pathway. It's not the horizon of 2050 is a pathway, and then the necessity of acting today and how. So that's why we need, you said we need timelines, we need milestones. And that's what I feel for myself that we need from the financial community or the one working on finance. We need targets, clear targets and milestones that can make this possible. Again, if we see what could the financial system could look like, not the system as its organization, but at least where the shift would have been taking place. Then how we backcast and just for today, from there to today. And that, in my view, again, I'm not a financial specialist, of course I'm fascinated by that, working with my team on that, but we need that. We need the milestone. I don't know when the shifting point is. And where, again, and I think that's why each sector has to do it. Because we have just to understand when it is. You know, when you speak about the people who are really talking about CO2 tons, we say we have to peak the emission around 2020, and really it means now more and more, because the scientific news are already more worrying, that it is really 2020, not meaning it's less than 3 years' time now. So we need this milestone. I think that's a powerful tool for understanding what we have to do, the clarity, the capacity for citizens, for NGOs, for the business, for, you know, just to understand what is the transformation needed. And again, I may be totally wrong, and I'm sorry if I am ignorant, but I don't have that for the finance, but I don't have that for the chemical industry either, or for the steel industry, or for, we begin to see for power, that's more clear, because then we can act. We can see and challenge and pressure and open the debates on that. So that's really, for me, very important. And that's why I think to understand when and how we can do the big shift and not wait for it, because that's where a little bit we are. It will come, but we don't know when. We need this sort of more interactive discussion and to see how this, of course, again, this 100 billion means nothing compared to what the investment should be done. That's, of course, it's a political number. It doesn't just adjust to anything, you know, it's the order of magnitude that's really nothing to see with what we need, in particular if you see that we will be that by 2020. So I think that really, I think what this community should do is being intensively thinking about this pathway, intensively thinking of the different milestones we will be there, to begin to have as a shared understanding on what the job we have to do. And that would be then shared by academic think tanks, NGOs, and citizens, and the cities who are borrowing money, and the investors as well. And you know, when you look at Norway, Denmark, BlackRock, well, you see that maybe your pension fund is not very active, but you could look at some others that really are trying to do it seriously. So I think it will come. So anyway, it would be a good target, and certainly helping you to do it.
Okay, and I'm afraid that is all we have time for.
I'm not responding to.
I know you haven't responded to the question about deep innovation and governance, which I hope we can talk about afterwards. I hope we can continue the debate, but we are running 5 minutes over. So I am going to have to wrap up now. Thanks very much, Laurence, for your insights into the state of global climate finance. Can I ask everyone to give a round of applause, please?